Hello everybody, welcome to another video. We are going to be going over some bit more advanced DAX calculation in this video. We're going to be going over how to get a cumulative value, so how to make this visual on the right over here. However, we're going to be doing it a bit differently. In this video, we are going to be using a little snippet from a full course that I just published on a website I just released with 6 hours, 10-hour videos out there. So if you guys want, you can go see the full video out there. It is at Learn-PowerBI.com. If you check out our courses, we've got a free one out there that you guys can go and check out. It's got a whole bunch of stuff in there that is great for getting started. If you want to get into Power BI, this is kind of how you can look at it, how you can kind of start out, get into it, get your feet wet with what you can do. And then if you do enjoy that course, we do kind of have a full extended course with which this next video is from, which has 6 hours of content on there that'll go super in depth on kind of a whole lot of setup steps that you guys can check out. So if you guys want, check out learnbi.com. And other than that, let's get back into the video and hopefully you guys enjoy it. Thanks.
So on this next visual, let's get into a bit of advanced DAX. So in this next one, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a cumulative measure to get the cumulative value on this time series, right? So using the same kind of time series concept of building out month over month values, let's do the same kind of thing, but get a measure to do a cumulative value for those same time series kind of visuals, right? So let's go ahead and walk through how to do this. So let's go ahead and just do a little sample here. So we've got month and year value. All right, so let's go ahead and essentially what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a measure where the December 2021 value is going to be the total, right? So that final value is going to equal our total cumulative of everything else, right? So it's going to be the sum of all of everything previously up to its final total value. So what we're going to want to do is create a new time intelligence measure. Let's go ahead and create a new measure here. Let's name this cumulative revenue, and we are going to be using that wonderful calculate measure. So we're going to be using our calculate expression. So let's go ahead and use calculate, and within that expression is again just going to be that base revenue measure that we've been using so much, still just building off of this one measure, right? So use that sum of revenue measure, and then within our filter statement, this is where we're going to get pretty advanced. So in our filter statement, we're going to use the filter function, and then in the filter function, its first argument is asking for a table. So the table that we're going to give it is an all selected of our date table. So what this is doing is within this context of this value right here, this value shows our revenue being 3.8 for April. So in that evaluation context of this measure, April 21, it shows a value of 3.8. What we're doing with this all selected statement is we're removing that April context. So this April context now goes away, right? So we're now looking at the total across all of these values. So if we go ahead and put this measure onto the table, what we will see is we will see just that same total value across the board, right? Because again, we've removed that evaluation context at each line item for the month and year because we're doing all selected on the date table. So our all selected is the full year, right? So it's getting us that total value, right? So that's what we're filtering with this filter statement. So once we do that, now what we want to do is we can then just take on a filter statement to go with making sure that our dollars, our revenue dollars date is less than or equal to the max of the current date context of the visual, right? So what we're doing here is we're saying that the date of our revenue, since that's our relationship with our calculation, the date relationship to our calculation right here is based on our revenue date, is less than or equal to the max date on the visual, right? So within our measure, we're taking the date of the revenue and we're taking it up until the max date on our context, right? So when I switch this up, what we'll see is we will see that summation value, right? So we get that initial value, which is equal to its base value, right? So we get that cumulative is equal to its initial month. That makes total sense. Then once we go into that next month, let me just format this 1 second. Then once we go into that next month, what we're doing is we're adding those 2 months up, right? So we're adding January to February to get that cumulative value. So again, going back down to December 21, we can see that that value is our total value. So that we ended up doing what we were shooting for there, right? So again, just a different way to visualize that same kind of growth metric and just visualize it differently within your data by using a different type of measure. So let's go ahead and visualize this now. If we use a area chart on this one, we can now see kind of how nice and pretty our visual looks there. Right, so with just changing up that measure, what we're able to do is just make our totally different visual now with that same base measure and just add an extra filter statement to it, right? And then what we can do on top of this to make this even more powerful is let's compare this value, this cumulative growth rate, to last year's cumulative growth rate, and then get a growth rate on that. Very similar to how we did on this other visual, but instead of monthly growth rate context, we can now show year over year growth context in that area type visual, right? So it's just a completely different way to kind of show that same data, but again, just get different insights, right? So let's go ahead and create that value. So what we're going to do is very similar to the sum of revenue last month. Let's just go ahead and create a sum of revenue last year. So let's go ahead and just copy it, make a new measure, switch up the name, and switch up its duration to year. So all we did was just copied that sum of revenue last month, pasted it, renamed it to a last year value, LY, and switched up its duration to -1 year. So let's go ahead and enter on here. And now what we want to do is same kind of thing, just copy that sum of, or that cumulative revenue one. This is going to be cumulative revenue last year. Let's go sum of revenue last year. Keep the rest of our filter statement the same because we're still doing the same exact thing, just in that last year context. And then let's go ahead and format this guy. 0. And let's drop you on. So there you go. So now we can see that we've got those cumulative values and we're comparing to each other, right? So now that last step, let's throw on a growth rate. So one more growth rate measure, and let's just again just copy and paste our previous one. We don't need to type all of that divide stuff out again. Let's go revenue year over year growth rate. Sum of revenue last year, sum of revenue last year. Wonderful. And let's switch you to a percentage, and we don't need you showing any decimals. All right, great. So now what we struggle with here, though, on this visual is how do we get this to show properly, right? So if we just throw this revenue growth rate onto the visual, it kind of messes everything up, right? Because it's a percentage. So we can't kind of, if we throw it as a secondary still, right, it still kind of messes everything up. It kind of throws our whole visual out of whack. But what we can do is throw it on the tooltip. What we don't need it to do is we don't need that value to really visualize itself. We can see the difference in growth rate, right? We can see that this current value is much higher, right? Our people know how to read this graph, right? That difference is going to be our growth rate, right? Our current year is just higher than our previous year. We can see we've grown. So we don't necessarily need to visualize it because this visual is visualizing it. But we still want to show that growth rate and show its value. So you can just put it on the tooltip. So now that we've got it on the tooltip, when we hover over, let's pop it out real quick. When we hover over, we only see the two values. Let's put the tooltip back on. We now see that revenue year over year growth rate, right? So now at every month and year context, you'll still have that growth rate value, but it's not going to interfere with kind of how that visual is displaying in its visual way, right? So again, just a super powerful way to use those visuals just to know what tools you've got with Power BI to put the visual in the best kind of powerful, most value add way possible onto the page. So that, again, cumulative measure, super quick and easy. Compare it to last year, great looking visual. So all right, that's that next visual, and on the next one we will get into a couple more visuals. We'll be doing some donuts and pie charts, and see you guys on the next one.